What is up, everyone? Welcome back to the LFC Transfer Room YouTube channel. It's your boy Chris is back with an interview, and we are doing some transfer talk today. I'm joined by a Fulham fan and Fulham everywhere. I mean, just everywhere really in the world. Mr. Jack Collins, how are you, mate?
I'm really good, mate. Thanks for having me on. It's good to be back.
It is, yeah. We had you on Red or Dead back in the day, if I remember,
Yeah,
and it was
absolutely.
good fun, some good debates. So, yeah, we're talking about a potential move for a Fulham player to Liverpool. Now, if you lot are living under a rock, we will just let you know it's Fabio Carvalho, 19 years old, Portuguese youngster. Obviously born and raised in England as well. But Jack, I mean, starting off, the lad has come through at Fulham and really made a massive impression this season. But how much was that expected coming into it?
I think we've known that there was a superstar kind of coming through the ranks for a little while. Not necessarily that we know that it was going to start off straight away in this regard, but I think, we felt that Fab coming through the academy and coming through the youngster teams, there was always this talk about how good Carvalho is and how good and how special he could be. Now, there's obviously been players before, and we've seen this with a number of players. Ryan Sess came through and obviously was kind of touted as this. And then when Fab came, or was at least touted as coming through, it was a very similar kind of aspect. It was, there's a player here who's good enough already. Obviously, we saw bits and bobs of him last year. In the Premier League, as Fulham, hurtled towards that exit door to the trap door. Fab started to get a couple of games. He scored a goal at Southampton away. It was some really impressive performances, and it felt a bit like, okay, yes, we've been relegated, but the bright light is this kid's coming through and he's unbelievable. Obviously, Marco Silva took over in the summer, and you always worry then how a youngster comes in. And look, I think maybe there's worth pointing out at this point that when Fulham are bouncing between the leagues and you're either in a relegation or a survival scrap, or you're trying to get promoted, it's hard for youngsters to come through. Now, it's harder, I imagine, if you're a centre-back or a centre midfielder than you are if you're an attacking player, if you're a winger. But it's difficult to break into the team. But Silva, from the very get-go, saw Carvalho and went, right, I'm going to build around him. I'm going to make him my 10. We've seen Tom Cairney drop back into a deeper position, which isn't unheard of. But I think it's one of those things that it's just a mark of how good Carvalho has been, that Cairney has been pushed back into a different role in order to incorporate him. And he's just been absolutely tearing it up every time he's played. A little bit of an injury record this season, but when he has played, he's been magnificent.
Yeah, I mean, I believe it's 7 goals in the Championship this
Eight
season.
now. Eight now. Got another one at the weekend. So
Well, there
8
we
goals,
go.
2
8 goals.
assists.
I mean, it's brilliant numbers for a guy playing in his first. I mean, but it must help playing in a team which is so free flowing and scores so many goals. I think it's 19 goals in 3 games or something ridiculous like that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And look, it suits him. And there's always going to be this question when you don't get as many opportunities, when you haven't got the ball as much. If Fulham do get promoted, please God, that if we do get back there, how does that affect his role? Now, obviously, we'll come on to his agents and what's going on. But this is the big question: is, do you believe he can get the minutes elsewhere? And if he does get the minutes at Fulham, are they going to be good enough minutes, quality minutes, in order to give him the opportunity he deserves to thrive? And we've seen that in the Championship. Does that translate to the Premier League? And as we've seen, Norwich won the Championship last year. It's taken them a while to adapt. It's not necessarily about who the best team are. It's actually about who the team that adapts best to the rigors of the Premier League are. And if Fulham are able to do that this time, we've seen them not be able to do that the last couple of times round. So, yeah, he's been unbelievable. He's got, I think we're talking about sort of a goal or an assist every 117 minutes in the Championship, which is ridiculous numbers for a teenager at this level. But I think maybe the most impressive thing is that, you look at Ryan Sess, and obviously these comparisons are going to come up because they're the two big youngsters that Fulham have brought through in recent times that, have gone on, to make a big move. In Sess's case, it hasn't quite worked out for him, but I do still think there's talent there and he's going to be fine. You kind of compare them having those breakout seasons in the Championship, and Sess was an unbelievable finisher and a beautiful ghost of a player in that he'd turn up at the back post and no one would notice. And, he'd scored so many goals that season. Fab's very different in that he creates for himself, and his shift of body weight, his ability to feint, his kind of tenacity in the middle for someone young and slight is absolutely incredible. And I think maybe that's the thing that's most impressed this year about him. It's that, yes, he has the ability. Yes, he can take 3 or 4 players out of a game with one twist of his hips. But ultimately, it's also about the fact that he's in there battling away, challenging much bigger players, fighting centre-backs for headers. He's not winning many of them, I'll be honest. But, he's still in there giving that attitude and giving that tenacity. And I think that's so important for a player like this. It's very easy if you're if you're in this Fulham team and they are free scoring at the moment, and it is lots of fun to watch, and I'd imagine lots of fun to play in, it's one thing being really good in a good team. It's another thing having that tenacity, that work rate, that drive. And I think Fab has that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we mentioned earlier Harvey Elliott. He made the move from Fulham to Liverpool with a tribunal fee. Do you think? I mean, I'm not sure how much of it will be in Fulham's hands, but do you think any relationship between the two clubs will be tarnished because of that?
I don't really know. It's an interesting one. Obviously, we've seen Harry Wilson come back to Fulham in kind of almost apology, it felt like at times. So I don't know quite how it was worked out. And I know there were parts of it that were done via the fee, and therefore the things weren't paid quite up front in the same way that they might normally. So I'm not quite sure if that's managed to restore the reputation. I'd imagine taking another one for, free in inverted commas is probably not great for that. But ultimately we're looking at, Liverpool are a side who are ahead of Fulham and above Fulham, miles above Fulham in the pyramid. And therefore you've got to kind of accept that sometimes your place in the food chain is that. But to lose a player for free, I think of this caliber would really, really hurt. I think the thing is, you look at this Harvey deal, and, I spoke to Harvey earlier in the year, and he's having obviously an amazing time pre-injury. This was being at the club he's always dreamed of playing of, the club he supports, and all of the above. But I think you look at it and think what happened next for Harvey Elliott was that he went to Liverpool and then he went back to the Championship on loan. And you kind of wonder what happens if this Fabio Carvalho deal does happen for Liverpool, because it feels like Carvalho is probably too good to go back to the Championship on loan. But equally, is he going to get lots of minutes in a struggling Premier League side? And therefore, where do you send him if you are going to put him out on loan? Because I don't think he's going to start for Liverpool straight away. You don't play with a 10. That very much is his role. I know that we're seeing not the end of contracts, but I'd imagine over the next year, 2 years, we're going to see this structure of this Liverpool side change. And maybe the formation will change with it. Maybe things will open up in that 10 role will return to Liverpool. But right now, it doesn't feel like he fits. And that, I think, is perhaps the most interesting thing. He's linked to Leeds, not convinced by that either. He's linked to Wolves and he's linked to Saints. And I do think of the four he's linked to right now, it probably makes most sense for him to go to a Wolves or a Southampton, because I think he probably starts to get minutes straight away at those clubs, whereas I don't think that necessarily fits at Liverpool. Now, obviously, it's not all about that, and it's about building for the future. And I appreciate all of these things. And I'm on a Liverpool podcast. I appreciate that you're going to want to sign unbelievable young talents for these things. I'm just thinking about his development. And I do think that he needs those minutes. Maybe he comes back to Fulham on loan, but I'm just not sure how Fulham would react to it. I don't know how it would go down, considering the kind of niche ins and outs of that system, and whether that would work.
Yeah. I mean, let's talk about his agency, because I'm pretty sure I read that he's represented by his family, if I'm right. But Jorge Mendes is sniffing around, if I'm not mistaken.
I
6
think
months
I
left on
think
his
he's
deal.
advising is the term using. Jorge Mendes is apparently advising Fab's family. Now, obviously, that Portuguese link, so you see it, but yeah, it does feel like that's the way it's going.
Yeah. So with 6 months left on his deal, I mean, what if you're Fabio Carvalho, and I want you to take your Fulham hat off, and I don't want you to put any Liverpool hat on or anything. I want you to put your Fabio Carvalho hat on. Where or what is the best thing for you to do? Because it's a really difficult one.
Yeah, I agree. I completely agree. And I do understand the things. From what I'm told and what I've learned, the offer that Fulham have put on the table is a decent one. And what he was actually after was a guarantee of minutes. Now, obviously, you can't really give that because it undermines the manager. It's a bit of a strange thing to talk about in terms of what you're putting in. But I completely understand why Carvalho is after that if he's going to stay at Fulham. I think that the trick is, if Fulham get promoted, we have a history of not keeping players against their will. But perhaps that's the most important thing here, is that, if Fabio signs a 3-year deal, a 4-year deal, whatever it wants to be, and next year he has a year in the Premier League if Fulham get promoted and plays in this team, and then a bid comes in for him that's a good value, a worthwhile bid, I think Fulham would let him go. Because I think that's what we saw with Ryan Sessegnon. We saw that we'll give you a year, give us a year in the Premier League, see if we can make it work. And if it doesn't work out, then we will let you make that move for the correct fee, for the amount of money that we think you're worth. Now, I understand that he will be like, I want to be given a release clause or whatever that needs to be if he's going to move up the pyramid. But for me, it makes sense, I think, to see if you can get those minutes with a manager that trusts him. From what it's worth, you hear that Carvalho is happy at Fulham and Marco Silva loves him. They have that Portuguese connection with him and Boamorte in the dugout. It's already there. And he knows that if Fulham are to get promoted, they will trust him with those minutes. I think if you take that aside and you think, okay, he's not going to sign there because he doesn't want to sign a new contract, fine. He wants to live. I would go a step up the ladder. I would be looking at a Saints, a Wolves, someone who you think you might be able to break into that first team within 6 months. And even if it is those minutes, you're getting them in the Premier League straight away. I appreciate that everyone is going to want to strive for the very best and sign for, teams of Liverpool's quality, of Liverpool's caliber, who challenge for titles, who win trophies. And I get all of it. I just think there's a pathway that you can follow. And if you do get those opportunities and you do get a side that fits your development in terms of where you play, it just makes more sense to me because I think he's good enough and talented enough. And I think he believes this to get to the very top, whichever path he takes. And I just think there might be a little bit more structure if he doesn't do that. But you can understand why he'd want to go, and see the bright lights and see these moments. And he'll look at Harvey. And he'll look at other players who have down this development path, and he'll see the youngsters getting minutes at Liverpool. And I do appreciate that, as teams go, as big clubs go, in terms of actually giving minutes to youngsters who they trust, Liverpool are right up there with the very, very best. I just think he's best in a 10, and I'm struggling to see where that fits in right now.
Yeah, I mean, stripping it back, as you mentioned, he's a number 10. In terms of people who've never watched Fabio Carvalho play before, how would you describe him to, your average football fan?
He's a very clever, intricate footballer. He is the kind of player that likes to get the ball in space. He drives really, really well in possession. And weirdly, it's something that Fulham don't really possess. He's the only one who looks to pick up the ball and drive at defender. He's very, very good at shifting his weight in terms of getting himself out of tight spaces, in terms of leaving a defender for dead. He just has that kind of ability, that X factor where you see, wow, he's absolutely stepped someone and gone. It's a rugby term, I suppose. But ultimately, it's that sense of he can make something out of nothing because he's able to get the ball and shift in a way that defenders just can't act. And Fulham were 4-1 up against Birmingham the other week, and they went and scored a goal, and it felt like they poked the beast. Carvalho gets the ball on the edge of the box, and with one kind of swift, deft movement, shifts it out of his feet and just curls one into the bottom corner. And it feels like he has that ability to make things happen all the time, which is obviously something when you're looking at players, you think that's an X factor. That's a player that you want to have on any given team because they can make those things happen. He can play wide. He has played wide a little bit. He's less effective, I think, in that space because he looks to kind of really drive. And the player weirdly I'd compare him to who does thrive wide, and maybe that Carvalho has this in his locker, is a bit Emi Buendia. In that he has that ability to just look up, to find the space and to execute on it time and time again. And perhaps those kind of players, he's not a distant striker. He's not like a Coutinho who'd come in and look to pick him out from 30 yards. But he definitely has that ability to move in short spaces, to shift and to make things happen in those intricate areas when perhaps you're struggling to unlock the door.
Yeah, definitely. And finally, I would like you to just give a likelihood out of 10 that you think Fabio Carvalho could end up at Liverpool, and why.
8. I think his head's turned. I really do. Not necessarily in a negative way. And I know that term is sometimes used in a bad or a condescending manner. I don't mean that. But I think the interest from Southampton, West Ham, he was thinking about it. He was starting to go, okay, maybe these opportunities are coming. I think the interest and the discussions or the preliminary offer, I'm not sure it's been made more than a kind of, well, shall we say, it's nothing concrete, but I think the preliminary ideas of what are being thrown around by Liverpool have really started to intrigue him. I think he believes, like we say, he believes in his own ability. He believes that he has the ability to go right to the very top. And I think the fact that a club of Liverpool stature have come in and said, look, we are genuinely interested in taking you on, has started to make him think about that being a next move for him. And look, you've got to respect his ability and his belief in his own ability to think I can go there and I can make it happen. Obviously, we saw Patrick Roberts sign for City all those years ago, and this week he was bought out of his City contract and signed for Sunderland League One. I just think it's a precautionary tale that you can have all the talent in the world and that ability at your feet, and it doesn't always work out. But I do think it's likely, or not necessarily nailed on, but I think it's likely that Fabio Carvalho could now end up at Liverpool.
Thank you so much, Jack, for coming on the channel. It's been a real pleasure. Where can everyone go and find your work, mate?
I'm at Jack J Collins on Twitter, and the Ranks FC podcast is where we do our kind of general football chats. We'd love you to come and have a listen if you fancy coming and joining the party.
Absolutely, and definitely worth it. Thank you so much for everyone for listening and watching, and we will catch you in the next episode of whatever comes out on the channel next. We'll see